Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi, and welcome to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm Marie Stella, your host from Melbourne, Australia. Let's start the show.
Hello and welcome back to the show. As the years pass, our bodies and minds undergo quite the transformation, and our physical abilities, along with psychological needs, change. Yet, the fundamental human need for connection, touch, and intimacy remains a constant throughout this journey. So, in this episode, we'll be examining how sexual intimacy can evolve with age and adapt to physical changes. And we're joined by psychology researcher Ashley Macleod, who holds a PhD in the field of sexuality and aging. She has worked on the reconceptualization of the later life sexuality constructs and the development of a sexuality measurement scale that caters specifically for populations aged 45 and above. So, hi, Ashley. Welcome to the show. It's lovely having you here.
Hi, Marie. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really stoked to get right into this, and I'm really curious to know what your project has been on so far. So tell us about your background and expertise in sexual intimacy. What compelled you to pursue a PhD in this area?
A lot of different things, to be honest. One of the things that I am particularly passionate about is health equity and the right for everybody to live the life the way that they want to. And that kind of channeled into sexuality for me. So I guess the way that I thought about it was I didn't understand this myth that once you were a certain age, suddenly you just had no more interest in being sexual or intimate with other people, and you just lost that part of yourself. I've had plenty of conversations with people of all ages, and I know for a fact that that is definitely not the case, but a lot of people felt pressure to let go of that part of themselves as they aged, and I really didn't think that was necessary. So that kind of led me to doing the PhD. And then when I was looking for research topics, one of the things I found was that honestly, when people talk about sexuality, intimacy, or sexual function, no one's really talking about the same thing. They use the same terms and they can be talking about completely different aspects. So I really wanted to better understand if we're talking about the people who are experiencing this, how are they experiencing it, and how can we better educate other people, especially health professionals, about this aspect of life beyond reproductive ages, and how do we normalize the idea that you can be sexual until you die, basically.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I'd love to learn more from you. But before we get started on that, what would you say is the biggest misconception that people have about sexual intimacy?
Well, I guess the biggest one is that sex is penis and vagina. That's not all sexual intimacy is. And the other side of it is, as I mentioned before, that once you hit a certain age, that's just not the done thing anymore, and that you have to let go of your sexual self.
Yeah, and I can think of a few reasons why that might be the case. But before we go further into detail, I would love to get to know you better. So this is Have You Met Ashley? And the first question I have for you is, what is your favorite book?
My favorite book, I'm actually really into fantasy and romance. So my favorite book is probably The Fairy Godmother by Mercedes Lackey. She is a feminist writer for the most part, a fantasy writer, and The Fairy Godmother is a retelling of the Cinderella story, but from the perspective of the Cinderella that didn't get to be a Cinderella, and she became a fairy godmother's apprentice. And so it's a really lovely story. It's got great characters. character development. It's funny, and it really gives an interesting spin on the idea that someone's preordained path. Um, it's not just a case of you don't get to control it, you actually do get to control the narrative.
Yeah, I love that. And what about movies? Are there any that you've enjoyed recently?
Whew, honestly, the last movie I got to watch for myself was probably Deadpool and Wolverine, and I absolutely loved it. Mostly what I get to watch is shows and movies my kids want to watch, but it is really fun watching how they respond to all the kids' movies that I used to love as well. So, yeah, that certainly keeps my movie quota up, but I don't really get to watch much for myself.
Yeah. And what about podcasts? Are there any you're listening to at the moment?
Yeah, so my two favorites at the moment, one is called Betwixt the Sheets. It's a feminist look at sex, scandal, and society. It's a historical podcast. So the episode I just listened to was about the history of bras. It
Hmm.
was really fun, really interesting. They go into a whole bunch of different things. It's yeah, it could be a societal thing. There's one that looks at the first queer activists, the history of cross-dressing and transgenderism. Um, the One of the funniest ones that I listened to was the history of lube, which, believe it or not, has been around for about 3,000 years. um,
Wow.
yeah, and the other one I'm listening to at the moment is called The Neurodivergent Woman. So it's a psychology-based podcast that looks at neurodivergence for women and girls, which is often quite understudied and not very well understood. So being neurodivergent myself, it's really interesting.
Yeah, this is some fascinating picks for podcasts. I love learning about history, and I think it's so important to learn more about history in whatever like area that you're interested in, especially with the queer community. I think a lot of the younger generations quite aren't quite aware of the history of it, and it's really important to know where people have come from. Um, I recently had an encounter with a young queer person who had no idea the reasons that the older generations would have had to go into lavender marriages and only came out of it divorced and only embraced their true selves in their later years. And they were like, why would you do that? But it just wasn't that easy back in the day. So I think it's really important to learn about the history of that. So
Yeah.
yeah, those sound like really good picks. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, I'm
Um,
more than happy to.
my next question for you is there someone that you look up to either in your professional life or personal life?
um, the person who inspired me to go back and get my PhD was actually Brene Brown. My best friend said, "You need to watch this podcast." Well, this TED talk, I should say. And I just kind of sat there not moving for the 40 minutes it was. And I had this light bulb moment of, you mean I can have a job where I get paid to ask questions for a living? And that kind of was it for me. And I think the work that she does in shame, and you know the dynamics of our emotions within a social setting as well, and how that shapes our relationships has been really, really life changing for a lot of people. And I love the idea that just reframing something that everybody experiences and saying it in a way that people can connect to outside of like a scientific or an academic space, just being able to give people that knowledge and that understanding of themselves can be completely life changing for people.
Yeah, 100%. I've always found the way that Brene Brown packages all of this information in a way that's so digestible to the average person, and also with the books that she has published as well. Yeah, I've always found it to be particularly inspiring to and very impressive, obviously. But my last question for you is: has there been a course or a class that you've taken that has stuck with you to this date?
Oh gosh, well, I am thirsty for knowledge, so there's probably too many courses that I've done to really say that, but I guess the thing that has stuck with me the most and the thing that's sorry, excuse me, carried me through my own learning journey and my own research is the idea that there is no specific piece of information that sits by itself. And the way that those different courses I've done overlap, and the way that you can take learning from one spot and then look at something else through a different lens, and the nuance and the new perspectives it can give you, I think that's probably more what stuck with me than any one particular course. But again, having good teachers that can give you the frameworks to be able to transfer that knowledge is really important.
Yeah, 100%. I've always felt like my favorite classes were the ones where the teachers have done a particularly good job at packaging the information, and also inspiring their students to kind of take that information and find their own path and do whatever they want with it. Um, yeah. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I hear you.
As a teacher, that and still is one of my favorite moments where people kind of absorb the knowledge in a way that allows them to think bigger than the fact you gave them. And they can think about it from their own perspective about the world and, oh, but what does that mean in this situation? Those moments are just chef's kiss. I love those moments and I love being able to help people reach that moment.
Yeah, I have to say that's definitely one of my favorite things about going to uni in the past has always been like seeing what other people come up with the same like tools and knowledge from classes. It's
Yeah.
always so just refreshing, I suppose.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you. Now let's move on to the interview. And for starters, how would you define a relationship?
That's a good one. And I guess from my own perspective and from a research perspective, there isn't really one way to define it. We have so many different types of relationships. Got platonic relationships, we've got sexual relationships, we've got romantic relationships, we've got intimate relationships. So I guess for me, if we're talking specifically about relationships to do with sexual intimacy, a relationship is something where you have an understanding with the person um, that allows you both to seek intimacy and comfort with each other on a level playing field, whatever that may
Yeah,
be.
yeah,
So I guess to go into that a little bit more, when I say level playing field, I don't necessarily mean that excludes any sort of power play, role play, or anything like that. But you go into it with an understanding of where you stand with each other. And I think even on a short term basis, if it's a casual basis, knowing that, you know, this is what we're trying to achieve together, that's probably the key aspect of a relationship.
yeah, that's really well said. And what about sexual intimacy? What is your definition of that?
Sexual intimacy is anything that basically fires up our sexual part of the brain, anything that can give us a sense of sexual power, sexual enjoyment, physical, um, physical engagement and enjoyment. It doesn't have to be the classic, um, you know, tab A and to slot B kind of idea that's so heteronormative and restrictive. It can be sensual massage, it can be kissing, it can be shared touch. And I think sexual intimacy is different to just normal physical intimacy and platonic intimacy in that it's designed to forge that deeper connection with someone and to kind of get the sexual parts of your brain firing and leading to some sort of sexual gratification.
Yeah. And how would you describe the relationship between relationships and sexual intimacy?
Um, they don't really have to go hand in hand. I mean, I know as we age, it becomes much more important to have that connection between relationship and sexual intimacy and the ability to connect with the person. But I mean, if you look at hookup culture and all those sorts of things, they don't have to connect. It's about what it is you're seeking. If you're only seeking that sexual gratification and you're not really interested in forming a deeper connection with someone, that's perfectly okay too. But I think it's important that the people involved, whether it's 2 people, 3 people, however many people, everybody kind of needs to know what other people's expectations are so that no one gets hurt and so that there's not really any, risk of miscommunication there.
Yeah, and tell us a bit more about how sexual intimacy evolves with age. What does it look like as a young person versus an older person?
Yeah, well, I guess the biggest thing that stands out in the research, and I mean, the people living this will be able to attest to it as well, but it's nice when research and real life overlap. Um, as as a younger person, it tends to be more about quantity. So it's about how often you get to experience sexual gratification. It's about um, in hookup culture, it's about how many different partners you have engaged with. And it's that variety and that experimentation that tends to draw people in. It's more about experimenting and finding what you like. And there is, of course, as a younger person, an overlap with connection and forging relationships, but it tends to be less pronounced in our younger years as we're trying to figure out who we are as a person and what we like before we kind of connect that to who we are with someone else. As we get older, reflecting general life, we tend to have a better idea of ourselves and what we like and what we don't like. And we tend to forge deeper connections with people. We tend to, have deeper relationships with partners. We tend to have deeper relationship with friends. And those connections and that shared experience becomes a much more pronounced part of our lives. It's not about having 20 friends. It's about having those 5 friends that you can rely on, or even 2 friends, to be honest. And sexual intimacy is kind of the same sort of journey for people. So you start off trying to figure out what you like. And there is a certain element to that in later life as people kind of might feel a bit stuck or they start to experience different aspects of their own physical health that impact their previous sexual expression. But again, the biggest part of sexual intimacy as we age becomes more about who we're with and those shared experiences and taking your time and really enjoying things. So it's less about quantity and more about the quality of those relationships and the quality of those experiences. So even if you are an older person who doesn't want to have a relationship, you're still looking for a sexual partner who is in it for the experience and not the, um, you know, hit it and quit it kind of idea. You want to know that the partner is interested in your pleasure as well as their own. And that becomes much more pronounced as we get older.
That honestly sounds way more fulfilling than sex in younger years. And I'm actually looking forward to that because aging sounds beautiful from what I've heard so far. But, we have covered a couple of the common misconceptions about sexuality and aging. So, in what ways do those misconceptions, I guess, sort of harm the sexual experience that people experiencing aging go through?
It's interesting to think about the overlap between generational perspectives and people's sexuality as well. So if you think about baby boomers and the generation before that, they're very much this is the done thing or this is not the done thing for a lot of their lives. So their own behaviors are very much influenced by the way that society tells them they should be. And battling that, even in the privacy of your own room, can be really challenging. Younger generations tend to have much more of a fluid idea about this is who I am and this is, I like this and, what I do in the privacy of my own home is no one else's business. So it gives them a bit more opportunity to explore the things that are going to keep the spark going. But I guess a lot of the challenges for people is this idea that sex is for younger people, that you have to be young and, have so much vitality, and the idea that you have to have a really quick refractory period, or that, you need to be able to just, a cool breeze could set you off sort of thing. And as you get older, you've got your hormones change, your body changes, the way that you feel sensations sexually changes. And so there's this idea that honestly has kind of been perpetuated by research that focuses on penetrative sex, that if you aren't naturally producing your own lubrication as someone with a vulva, or if you're not getting an erection as someone with a penis, then that means that it's done. Sexual intimacy is done for you. And we have things like Viagra, which incidentally was actually designed as a heart medication, not for erectile dysfunction. But we have those things to help people to get and sustain erections. We have, different medications for people who have vaginismus and dryness. We have lubricants. Those kind of deal with the physical aspects, but we need to remind people that once you hit a certain age, whatever that age may be in your mind, it doesn't make your value as a person or as an independent thinker any less. And so I think challenging those stereotypes about, oh, well, once you've had kids, you've done your job, your time as a sexual being is done. That is really hard for a lot of people to overcome, because historically, that's what we've been told. And, grandparents' role is to, spoil the grandchildren and to, potter around the house and do all these delicate things and not be real, engaged, vibrant people. It makes me think of Grace and Frankie, the TV show.
Yes.
And how, life-changing that was for some people, because they suddenly got permission to see themselves as a sexual being again. And so sometimes it requires trailblazers and people in the public eye to stand up and say, well, that's, I'm not going to let age stop me, to give other people the confidence to know that they can, still enjoy sexuality, sexual intimacy. It doesn't have to be, oh, well, you're too old for this kind of crap.
Yeah. And we've briefly touched on the fact that one of the major misconceptions about sex is the fact that it has to be like penetrative sex, right? And how that essentially perturbs or like steers older generations from I guess engaging in sexual intimacy, because they think that that's the only way to have sex. But I was really curious to know, what are the age-related physical changes that may actually, affect sexual intimacy as a whole regardless? And what are the different ways to get around them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess one of the biggest things that people tend not to think about is how our mobility changes as we age. We're not necessarily as flexible. We might have, a sore back, or our hips may not be as agile as they used to be. And so props and braces can be really helpful in those situations. So if you think about, there's like a triangle wedge that you can get for when you're pregnant that kind of fits under your belly. Those sorts of things can be adapted to being sexual aids, so it can give you a bit more support in your hip area if you don't necessarily have the mobility or strength to be able to get into certain positions. Likewise, there are certain sexual positions you can do to kind of accommodate different disabilities, different mobility issues. But again, this kind of leads back to it doesn't have to be penetrative. You can use toys. You can just perhaps read erotica together. You can experiment with different ways to touch each other. There's so many different things that you can try. And it's not just about, being a young person and visiting a sex store and seeing what all this stuff is happening. That's not limited for age. You can, if you're private, you can order things online and try new things. There's a lot of mobility aids that can be used to support sex or sexual intimacy just as much as they can be used to support comfortable sleep or comfortable sitting or all those sorts of things. So I guess my biggest thing is mobility. Just be creative. You know where your body hurts. Figure out what you need to do to support that area so that you can engage with sexuality the way that you want to. I guess the other side of natural things that change, we don't think about things like skin fragility. So the older a person gets, the more fragile the skin is. So you may need to look at less vigorous forms of activity if you don't want visible signs of it. You might be into that, and that's completely fine as well. But being aware of the risk of increased skin fragility can be something that needs to be thought of before engaging in activity. And I guess the other side of it is the older we get, the more likely we are to take medication. And that medication can impact people's libidos. It can impact their sexual functioning. It can impact their mood. And being aware that you have the right to ask your health professional about those side effects and insist on them helping you find a solution for it. I know that can be really confronting, but having a good relationship with your primary healthcare network can be really helpful to make sure that you still have the sexual life that you want to. And yeah, I guess the other thing that comes to mind is long-term partners dying or divorce after children get old enough and leave the nest, so to speak. Sexuality doesn't have to be with someone else. So sexuality can just be you exploring your own body and finding out what feels good and finding that sexual release for yourself. I remember one of my participants from one of my research studies was a 92-year-old woman. And when we asked her how she's engaged with her own sexuality, she said physically she didn't really do much for herself. She wasn't interested in having a partner. She wasn't interested in forming those relationships, but she did really, really enjoy going to the beach and seeing all the young men run around in their Speedos. And for her, that was her sexuality. That was how she engaged with her own sexuality. And that can be as simple as it gets. I mean, you get to define what sexuality means for you. You might decide that you're ace and you don't actually want to be sexual with anyone else, but you still want to pleasure yourself. And that's just as acceptable as deciding in your 70s or 80s that you decide you want to try a swinging lifestyle and go experiment and, put your upside down pineapple on the cruise door so that people know that you're open to a fun time. And there's plenty of different options, and age shouldn't limit us. But I guess knowing our bodies and understanding what our own limitations are, regardless of our ages, it includes people with disabilities. It includes people who, have certain trauma hang-ups. Knowing your body, knowing what is okay for you, what turns you on, and knowing how to ask for that is a really, really good way to make sure that you are engaging with your sexuality the way that you want.
Yeah, I love that. That's really good advice. And I can't say that I personally relate to the person who enjoys going to the beach and look at men run around in Speedos. I'd say that's the bottom of the list. Thank you very much. But good for her for figuring out what she likes. It really goes to
Yeah.
show the range of things that people fancy sexually, I suppose. But
Yeah.
yeah, aside from the more physical aspects of sexual intimacy, what are some of the important factors that contribute to healthy sexual intimacy, whether it's in a relationship or on your own?
Well, one of the things that is really concerning is that um, the second fastest um, population group, like the second fastest rising diagnosis of chlamydia in population groups of the ages over 69. So we're looking at generations who were told that condoms were to prevent pregnancy and not, they don't have the um, broad brushstrokes here, but in general, the older populations were taught about contraception as a way to prevent pregnancy, not disease. And so there's actually a really bad problem, especially in aged care facilities, where sexual STIs, STDs can be quite pronounced, and they can have, for lack of a better way of describing it, outbreaks within a facility because people are being sexual in those areas, and they don't have the sexual education to know that condoms are not just about preventing pregnancy, they're also about preventing disease, and all of those sorts of things.
Oh yeah, 100%. I feel like, well, I have noticed that among the younger actually, I don't know if I can call myself part of the younger generation anymore, but I'm like 26 going on 27. So I'm just going to pretend that I am.
You're closer than I am.
Yeah. But yeah, I do notice that that's a huge misconception, even among the people that I know, where people don't realize if you are hooking up regularly, you should probably go to get an STI or STD check, especially if you haven't used protection. But even if you have, because you never know, at least once a year or something like that, it's a good ballpark, I'd say. But yeah, what would you say are some of the risks and, well, apart from chlamydia, what would you say are some of the risks that can occur for people who don't get these regular checks?
There's a lot. So one of the things that people don't realize is some STIs, especially in older people, can mimic things like dementia or other memory problems. So there have been instances in medicine where someone has STI-related dementia, and once the STI is treated, the dementia disappears, which is like if you have diagnosed dementia, that it's irreversible. That's, you're going to have it for the rest of your life. It's a long-term fatal disease, but there are certain STIs and STDs that can be treated that mimic other aged diseases or age-associated diseases. So I guess it becomes a real risk in later life to not be aware of where, your sexual health risks. Add to the fact that, you don't necessarily have the same sort of relationships with your peers that you do as a teenager or someone in puberty, where there's, it is a topic of conversation for a lot of kids because they don't want to talk to their parents about it. So you talk to your peers about it and you can learn different things. And then, of course, the younger generations will learn through porn as well, which is a whole other, bucket to explore. But traditionally, older generations aren't necessarily as tech savvy, so they're not necessarily going to automatically think about going to the internet. And, obviously everything is true on the internet. But those resources for younger people, where if you're shy about asking your doctor, you can Google it. That's not necessarily the case for older generations. So that's another risk is where do you get your information? How do you make sure it's reliable? And who do you trust to give you the facts and not sugarcoat it or, pat you on the head and say, oh, you shouldn't be worried about that at your age. There's a lot of ageism inherent in health. And that is really exacerbated in the sexual health space.
Yeah. And what about gender differences? Are there any is there anything you notice there with regards to how the different genders are being perceived or treated in with regards to sexual intimacy?
Oh, yeah, there's the old trope of, the horny old man. and the timid old woman. So the idea that men can get old and their inhibitions release, and then they run around the aged care facility, try to pinch old lady on the bum, that persists. And to a certain extent, there are some like that. But the old lady who's not interested in sex or sexuality is the biggest crock. Like, I have, for the most part, I think a lot of heterosexual women are just done with men by that age. They're just like, from their generation and their experience, they're just like, I want this to be about me. I spent most of my life having it be about my husband and my kids. I want this to be about me and what I want. And more power to them to be able to say that. But I don't think there's a lot of women who are able to say that out loud. And so this idea that there's this, kind, naive older lady who's only ever had sex to procreate and is not interested in that because it's not proper. That is a huge misconception that lasts today. And honestly, some of the dirtiest minds I've ever come across have been from older women who have just decided that they can't be bothered playing by the rules anymore. And they're going to say all the things that they wanted to say when they were in their 20s and 30s. And now that they're in their 70s and 80s, who's going to stop them?
Yeah. And I just putting myself in their shoes, I just imagine that their attitude towards men when engaging in sexual activity with men, it's more of if they reject the man, it's more of because it's the attitudes that the man is exhibiting rather than the fact that they don't want to do it. Because I'm barely halfway there and I'm already pretty much done. Thank goodness I have found a nice, decent partner to be with. But I actually don't think I could stand another week in that pool. So what as the expert, what is your advice? What do you think needs to be done here to bridge this gap?
That's a good question. And honestly, the more stuff we have normalizing different experiences across different ages in the general media, the more likely we are to empower people to be able to live the life they want to. And we see this we've seen this in popular culture with, increased LGBTIQA exposure that empowers people to say, oh, I'm not alone. It allows people to go, actually, I never thought of it that way, or, okay, that's something that I want to explore. And being able to do that for sexuality and intimacy across the ages and normalize sexuality and intimacy across the ages as being something that's just an inherent part of who we are and an inherent human right, that's going to go a long way to removing some of the stigma. It's going to go a long way to removing those perceived types of people about what's acceptable behavior for older people. And when I do say older people, I am specifically thinking of those who are, called later life. So people in their 80s and 90s. When I think of people who are in their 40s and 50s and in midlife, I guess you'd call them in science. There is still a lot of the stigma related to it as well. And the idea of the 50-year-old divorcee having no chance at a happy relationship because they're old and done and, they're not youthfully attractive and no one's going to be interested in your old, all of that is feeding into this idea that you can only be sexual or, pursue sexual intimacy if you're younger, if you're youthful, if you don't have kids, if you need to be single and carefree and youthful and embrace all these things, and you need to not show signs of aging, and you need to You need to show that you are up for it, I guess. And it's not gonna change until it becomes visible in the mainstream media and acceptable, which is why shows like Grace and Frankie are so empowering for people, because it gives them permission to admit to themselves, even if not to someone else, that okay, this is actually, this is normal. I'm not, a deviant because I'm still having sexual urges at 60 or 70, or it's normal.
Yeah, I love that. And I was also really curious to know because I have seen some studies suggest that older adults with better quality of life experience less sexual dysfunction. And I was wondering, from what you know, how accurate is this? And if so, why?
I guess it depends on how they're measuring sexual dysfunction, because that is a big thing that I came across in my research. Is often one study is not defining sexual function or sexual dysfunction in the same way that another one is. So where one is saying it's, medically diagnosed sexual dysfunction, so vaginismus, long-term erectile dysfunction, all those different sorts of diagnosable conditions. Another study might be saying, sexual dysfunction is just not having penetrative sex for more than 6 months or more than a year. So we do have to be really careful about how we look at that information. But in general, sexuality and quality of life are inherently tied. So someone's ability to express their emotions physically, whether that intimacy is just, heavy petting or cuddling or, mutual masturbation, whatever the case may be, being able to do that and having someone that you can do that with is a huge, contributor to whether or not someone is satisfied in their life beyond their sexuality.
So, because this is the relationships podcast, what is your advice for older couples who would like to try and address their life satisfaction issues and, as a result of that, improve their sexual intimacy?
It's a great question. All of the things that I've read and a lot of research into quality of life and relationships does point to the fact that sexual intimacy starts with intimacy. So connect with your partner, learn what they like. There's, some of the research that I did showed that as people get older, they start to get more sexual satisfaction for themselves through increasing their partner's pleasure. I do remember one of my participants was a man in his 70s who had erectile dysfunction, and he said that his sexual life with his partner was 10 times better, even though he couldn't get a penis or ejaculate, than it was before he had erectile dysfunction, because he felt more connected to his partner and they were, satisfying each other and finding new ways to engage with their bodies. And really, that is kind of the core of it. Having someone who you are comfortable with exploring new things, even if it's just the different ways that touch can feel, light touch, harder touch, touch in this part of the body, having someone that you have a strong enough relationship to say, I like that, or I don't like that, or what if we tried this? Those are really the foundation of a strong, intimate relationship, sexually or otherwise. Having a partner on the journey, or if you're solo and you want to stay solo, having the confidence to explore what you like, what different things might stimulate you, whether it's intellectually or physically. Experiment with things that have been taboo. Uh, there are surveys that you can do independently with, like, for free online with your partner, and you both go through a list of different things that are sexual in nature and rank them. And then you can compare your results, and it'll give you like the top 5 things that you and your partner both kind of are interested in. And that can give you somewhere to start. So there are tools that are out there that exist that can be used to help facilitate those conversations. Go get one of those card games from a sex shop, whether it's online or not, to learn more about your partner or learn more about what they like. If you don't have ideas, someone out there is kinky enough to try it and write about it. Read things. Don't be, stuck in this idea that you've reached a point in your life you just need to let it go. That is probably the fastest way to just feel like you don't have the right to be happy, and you do. My theory is the older you get, the more right to happiness you have. And not saying that younger people don't have the right to be happy, but there are a lot of distractions. You have to learn things, you have to experience things. And the older you get, the more experience you have, and the more you know yourself and the world around you, and the greater right you have to be able to say, actually, I don't like that, or actually, I do like that. And age should not ever be a reason that you aren't allowed to say something. Well, you can say something offensive and be told off for it. But my point is, you get to decide what your body likes and dislikes. You are the person in control of your body, and that you have the right to decide what happens with your body, whether it's medical, whether it's social, whether it's sexual, whether it's just related to physical intimacy with platonic people. Your body, your choice. And I think we do really need to continue to give that message to people who are older, especially the people who, as they get older, are being told, I know what's best for you. Oh, you're old and senile. I know what's best for you.
I hear the word senile being used so liberally for old people, and I don't think some people realize that senile doesn't actually mean just old. Like, you have to actually be losing your mental faculties to be considered senile.
And I mean, it's not really a term used a lot. If someone is considered senile, it's usually more to do with something like Alzheimer's or dementia. Someone who is not able to perceive or engage with the world around them in the way they used to. They can't recall things. They can't do things they used to be able to do. All those different things kind of feed into that. But a lot of people use senile as just a term to validate why they're not listening to someone. And it's rubbish.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I think that was fantastic advice and some TED Talk material right there. So I really appreciate it. Now let's move on to our practices and habits section and talk a little bit about the everyday application of what you've just shared with us. So what habit would you recommend practicing to maintain sexual intimacy with age?
I think it's important to stay connected with your romantic partner. It doesn't have to be sexual, but making the time to be together, to share intimate moments, whether it's cuddling up on the couch or doing, going for a walk, holding hands, being present with each other, just to be present with each other, is a huge thing to maintaining the sexual intimacy, because I see this on Instagram a lot, which is ridiculous, but the idea that you can just kind of ignore your partner and then tap them on the shoulder and expect them to be ready to go is not how it works in the real world. You have to show your partner that you're interested in them as a person before they're going to want to share themselves with you. And I think that goes for both men and women. I think it goes for the spectrum of sexualities and partnerships. I don't think it's just a heterosexual thing as well. I think you are more likely to want to engage with someone sexually if they've shown you that they're interested in who you are as a person,
Mhm.
as opposed to just someone that can scratch an itch. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's probably the biggest first step to maintaining sexual intimacy is maintaining all the other forms of intimacy.
Yeah, I personally struggled with that. Trying staying connected with my partner on a regular basis myself, just because the way I was brought up was very much like I've never seen my parents share a romantic moment in my life. And so I've never like witnessed what it's like to share the romance between partners.
Hmm.
And yeah, I've always been really awkward with it. So that's something that I've always struggled with. But I was curious to know, what are some of the common challenges that people face in staying connected with their partner?
Well, you just mentioned one, not having someone model for them what intimacy looks like on a day to day basis. We're completely flooded with media representation of what romance looks like. It's the big gestures. It's the, you know, standing on the rooftop shouting your love to someone. That's great. That if you did that every day, someone would, call the cops. Um, but I think we forget that those moments that we had at the start that kind of gave us a little bit of a flutter, it can be just as simple as, I missed you today, saying that, or, come sit on the couch with me. I love a good introvert party where you're sitting next to each other, doing your own thing, but sharing space and time. That can be a thing that you can do if more overt displays of affection are not particularly easy for you. But usually the first step, even if you're not particularly a physical person, is to just let people know in little ways that they matter. And, if you're with someone, the different things that make them go, oh, like I am the kind of person who doesn't like getting flowers. It just, seeing flowers built on the bench kind of makes me sad. But my husband learned that very early on in our relationship. And he used to get what we used to call flowers, which is just a paperback novel, something he thought I'd like. So he'd,
Oh,
order something online for like $7. It'd show up in the mail and I'd get flowers,
oh,
and so that was his way of showing affection without necessarily physically touching. But, I come from a very, very physical, outwardly affectionate family. Like, my parents are in their 70s and they still walk hand in hand. Like, it's adorable. My mum will
yeah.
be doing the dishes and dad will come up and cuddle her behind her. They're the cutest couple. But my husband didn't grow up in that sort of a family. My mother-in-law is lovely, but can struggle with physical affection sometimes, and that's fine. They kind of show their affection by play fighting. I don't do that with my parents, but every family is going to be different, and so my husband and I have worked out different ways to show affection, and he has adapted to me being a very touchy feely person, but I've also adapted to the fact that sometimes he doesn't want to be touched. And we can show affection other ways. Like I can, you know, check if he needs a snack or, you know, um, I saw this comic book and I thought you'd like it, or, different little things that just show the person that you're thinking of them and thinking of what they like, and sharing those moments. It can be as simple as, going for a walk. You don't have to hold hands. You can just, we're going to go for a walk. We're not going to stare at our devices. We're just going to go and be together for 10 minutes and just share space.
Yeah. And yeah, I love that so much. It really is just reminding the person that you love them so much. And
Yeah. And that you see them.
yeah, and that yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. I do like try to work on that as much as I can, just because my family was always a very much like I will show my affection for you by complaining about all the things that you do that annoy me. So
Well, I see you, but I see all these things that annoy me. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, it's some work to like find the middle ground for it, but it is really like fun to figure that out in my opinion as well. And find the language that the love language that's I suppose fits like it is the perfect blend of two people or more than two people, depending on like how many people are in your relationship. Yeah, but anyway, I digress. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I've had such a pleasure talking to you today, and I've learned so much from you. Now let's move on to our open mic segment, and this is your opportunity to talk about anything that you're passionate about. And it doesn't have to be related to the topic, but if you'd like it to be, then go ahead. The floor is all yours.
Oh, thank you. Well, obviously, everything that I've talked about today is definitely one of my passions. I think um, for me, the biggest driver for what I do, regardless of whether it's professionally or, as an advocate or anything like that, is we are all individual people and all have the right to be able to decide what is right for us. It's really difficult, especially in today's society, to not get disheartened by the fact that everyone seems to have an opinion about what you should do, and not many people are willing to listen to what you want. So, like in my current work, I am doing research and work in service improvement for cancer care. And so health equity is a huge thing for me. I'm looking at, how do we make sure that people who are in minority groups, or what, the Victorian Cancer Plan calls priority population groups, so people who, have worse outcomes in cancer or in health, or are at greater risk of developing cancer, how do we better serve that population? How do we make sure that the environments that we, engage with people are safe? And sexuality kind of comes into that as well. Sexuality is an inherent part of people's lives. We deserve the right to be able to decide how we engage with it, whether we engage with it, and whether we don't want to. And in health especially, there's this idea that once you hit a certain age, then we know what's best for you. You're out of touch with this. You don't have the most recent information. You don't understand how the real world works anymore. You're living in the past. And I really struggle with that idea, because some of the best conversations I've had are from people who are, what I would consider to be an elder of our society, whether it's, an LGBTI group person, or an elder Indigenous person, or just, a mainstream elder. And the reason I specifically use the term elder instead of older person is because I see the value in people's experiences through life, and the way that that information can be shared to make younger generations' life better. And I think that's true of all walks of life. And I think people who experience discrimination, minority groups, people who aren't as visible in the mainstream, have so much that they can share with us, that we can learn from, to grow as a community and to grow as an individual. I guess for me, the things that I'm most passionate about is making sure everyone feels like they get a voice.
Yeah, that's a wonderful use of the open mic. Thank you so much, Ashley, for joining us today. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
At the moment, probably the most up-to-date professional resource I have is on LinkedIn. So it's Ashley Macleod, PhD, on LinkedIn. You can find me there. Any of my academic publications can be found on Orchid ID. So I can share a link with that as well. I don't really post that much on social professionally, but I'm sure you could probably find the Oasis, which is the work I did on my PhD, on Facebook. If you wanted to go have a look at some of the older stuff, I've got older radio interviews from that research as well. But yeah, I'm unfortunately not that publicly active at the moment. I've been focused more on just getting things done day to day.
Yeah, that's so fair. I mean, likewise, I can't really keep up with all the socials either. But yeah, we'll link all of those in our show notes. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
You've been listening to Reloscope, the Relationship Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. For more episodes like this from 10 different life management perspectives, search LMSL on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, so you can get updated on everything we have to offer. We have a wide range of topics readily available for you to check out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps us grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at re.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Marie Stella. Thanks for tuning in.